Alright, let's do this. Okay. It's difficult to think where to start. Okay. So we need to establish something that, like, it's dubiously canon, but it's a whole thing. Okay, so the entire universe of the Elder Scrolls, right, is quite possibly all the dream of some incredibly powerful primordial being referred to as the Godhead, right? The entire universe was created, like the entire universe of Elder Scrolls was created in the dream of the Godhead. The Godhead is asleep, right? And the entire universe is just its dream, right? It is possible to escape from the dream and gain knowledge of the Godhead, escape from the dream, and become godlike yourself. This process is known as achieving Chime, right? That's Chim, achieving Chime, right? Or Chim, it's Chime or Chim, might be Chim, right? But essentially, like, there are mortals who have done it. There are divine creatures that have done it. But the point is, like, the entire universe is a dream that can be escaped from. Right. Okay. Um, and so the original beings in the stream are called um, Anu, Padme, and Sithis. Anu is a being that is, you know, it's Anu is good incarnate. Padme is no. Anu is stability incarnate, and Padme is change incarnate. And Sithis is the void, the eternal nothingness in which Anu and Padme existed. Um, there is also Nier, who is possibility incarnate. Um, Anu and Nier, like, they are in love, right? Padme and Anu are brothers, and Nier is the wife of Anu. The thing is, Padme is in love with Nier and wants Nier to abandon Anu and become his wife. But Nier refuses, and Anu tells him, "Can't do that, dude." And so Padme, in a great rage, slays Nier. Anu and Padme do battle. Anu is, successful. He defeats Padme, and he sanctifies Nier's corpse, and you know does all that kind of stuff, and creates the world of Nirn. Nirn, Nirn. That's Nirn. Essentially, Nirn is the entire. Nirn is the material plane. Sithis is the void, and Nirn is the material plane. Right. Um, right. And so, but as Anu does this, Padme comes back and slays Anu. Right. Um, and with his dying action, he slays Anu, and Padme and Anu die. The blood of Padme becomes beings known as they become beings known as the Daedra, and the mixed blood of Padme and Anu become beings known as the Aedra. Now, the words Daedra and Aedra come from Elvish language. Elves, I'll explain later, but Aedra means our ancestors, and Daedra means not our ancestors. But yeah, essentially that is how the universe of Nirn came to be created, and how the Aedra and Daedra came about. Essentially, Anu, Padme, and Nirn are all dead, and Sithis, the void personified, is what this plane of Nirn now exists in. And there's actually a fire outside. Okay, yeah, it's just a brush fire. Jeez. Okay. Smells pretty good, but like, I don't know. Like mesquite. Okay. Point is, okay. So, now there are the Aedra and the Daedra. Now there are countless Aedric beings and there are countless Daedric beings, but the most powerful of the Aedra and Daedra, those of the Daedra are known as the Daedric princes, and those of the Aedra are known as the divines. Now there wasn't really a definitive split between Aedra and Daedra until mortals came about and defined them. Well, the point is, they were all, like this. Right. Some of the notable Aedra were. Right, let's see, there were. Right, okay, well, I'm skipping ahead a bit. But, during the time of mortals, the notable Aedra are Stendar, Dibella, Julianus, Kianereth. There is Mara. There is Zenithar. There is Akatosh, who is the head of the divines. There is there's one more divine. RK. Yeah, RK is the divine. And, they do all kinds of stuff. And, the reason the Aedra are known as our ancestors is because those 8 Aedra, the ones I just listed, are responsible for the creation of the mortal world, right? So Anu, Padme, and Nier created, Nier, and but it was the Aedra who created the mortal world, right? Essentially, the plane is referred to as Nirn, but essentially, so they create the planet of Mundus, right? Mundus is another Elvish word, but like essentially, the Aedra are the ones who created the planet of Mundus, and the Daedra did not create the planet of Mundus. All right. Instead, the Daedra each created their own separate realm, apart from the realm of Nier, in which they hold, complete authority and dominance, whereas the Aedra are confined to the plane of Nier because of their creation of Mundus. Right, and how Mundus came about was, there's one of the, well, it's disputed whether he was an Aedra or a Daedra, but there is the being known as Lorcan. Now, Lorcan embodies, change, revolution. In many ways, he is the most like Padme. And, it is Lorcan, essentially he believes that there should be, some degree of freedom, some degree of choice in everything there is, whereas most of the Aedra and Daedra are, reluctant to give up the status quo. So what Lorcan does is he tricks and goads the Aedra into creating Mundus. Like, he convinces them that there will be a land of great beauty and prosperity and all of that if they create Mundus with him. But the thing is, in order to propagate Mundus and propagate life on Mundus, Lorcan tricks them into giving up portions of their power in order to bestow life to Mundus. Now the divines are, frankly, appalled and disgusted by Lorcan's trickery, and as an act of retaliation, they rip him to pieces and scatter his remains across Mundus. Essentially, they sever Lorcan's form from his divine center and send his divine center onto Mundus so that he cannot return to, the Adric plane. Lorcan's blood falls to Mundus and, seeps into the ground, bestowing it with, new life, and where his divine center, his heart, falls, it falls on the island of what will become Vardenfell, and where it lands, it creates an enormous volcano known as Red Mountain, and it sinks under the earth, well, under the crust of Mundus, right, and stays there. So, that's that. But so now the Aedra have had their power diminished, but now are confined to, dominion over, Nyr, whereas the Daedric princes have, taken up their realms of Oblivion, which is where they reside. Essentially, Oblivion is like a larger version of Nyr. Like, it's hard to explain exactly what Oblivion is. Essentially, it is a plane parallel to Nyr, but split into, thousands of different planes. And the most prolific planes are ruled over by Daedric princes. They do all that kind of stuff. They, create life, they populate their realms, and they rule over them. Meanwhile, there are several, the Aedra go about, ruling over Nyr and Mundus. Right, they do some things. The sun in, Elder Scrolls lore, the sun is actually a portal into the Aedric realm. It is through the sun that, the glory of the Aedra rains down upon Mundus. And the moons of Nyr, those are Master and Secunda, are said to be what is left of Lorcan after he was ripped apart. Pretty interesting. Right. But, the sun was created by an Aedra called Magnus, who, lived on Mundus for a period of time before departing back to the Aedric realm and leaving the hole that became the sun, and his followers, and with him, it became the stars as they punctured holes in, the sky. It's pretty cool. That's what they get up to. Kienareth, one of the Aedra, she creates nature and, animals and, weather, all that kind of stuff on Mundus. Those are all her creations. In some legends, she was said to be the bride of Lorcan, and that they created life on Nyr together, but, that's neither here nor there. Zenithar, it is Zenithar who creates the concept of trade and equity between individuals, commerce, regulation, all that kind of stuff. That's Zenithar's doing. Right? Actually, the idea of order and structure, it's pretty interesting. Mara is the, goddess of love and compassion and charity, Dibella is the goddess of beauty and sex, all that kind of stuff. It is Akatosh who guides the flow of time. Akatosh, as I mentioned, is the chief deity of the Aedra. takes on a draconic form. He dictates what they do, and if anything happens on Mundus that draws his ire or he believes should have gone differently, he can, reverse time and cause a different outcome to occur. It's pretty interesting. Arche is the deity of life and death, that cycle, that kind of stuff. And he, dictates that things will rise and fall. Pretty cool. Julianos is the god of wisdom and logic. He created magic, gifted the, divine gift of magic upon, Mundus, allowed it to exist there. And Stendar is the god of mercy and justice. Essentially dictated that there is a code to which all things on Mundus would be governed and judged. Sorry. So that's what they all do. They all exert their influence over Mundus and, shape it as they see fit. Let's see. And, there are lesser Aedra called the Et'ada, right? The Et'ada, or they are sometimes called the Elnofe. Essentially roughly translates to earth bones. But no, there are the Et'ada, Elnofe, whatever. But and the Elnofe are the lesser Aedra who come down to Mundus and, begin to live there. Now bear in mind that between the creation of Mundus and Lorkhan's death, there was like a large amount of time. Right? The Elnofe and the Et'ada lived on Mundus while Lorkhan was still alive. And Lorkhan made his home on Mundus, as it was his greatest creation. Excuse me. Whatever. Those the Et'ada who followed Lorkhan, were known as the Wanderers. They lived lives of, hardship and, all that kind of stuff, living on Mundus, while the Et'ada that resided with the divines, the Aedra, they lived lives of peace and tranquility. And, but when Lorkhan began to siphon power from the Aedra and, use that to propagate Mundus with life, essentially the Et'ada had most of their divinity stripped away, and they were brought down to Mundus, as they were no longer divine, really. The Elnofe, the Aedric Elnofe, and the Wanderers, came to a head. They battled. The Wanderers sided with Lorkhan, and the Elnofe sided with, the Aedra, and eventually Lorkhan was destroyed, but both the Elnofe and the Wanderers were left on Mundus, as mortals. And the Elnofe, they became elves, and the Wanderers became human. Right? Elves is, our word to describe, but the elves would call themselves mare, right? So essentially there are men and mare. And, that whole situation is the whole ideological debate between men and mare, because mare view Lorkhan as a trickster, a deceiver, just one who stole their divinity from them. Whereas men view Lorkhan as their divine creator, bestower of all that they enjoy in life, and, all that kind of stuff. Like, both men and mare worship the Aedra, but men worship Lorkhan whereas Mare demonized Lorcan. To elves, Mare, Lorcan is essentially the devil, who thrust them out of the Garden of Eden. Whereas to men, Lorcan is the being who granted them the knowledge to allow them to live outside of that Garden of Eden. It's a whole thing. It's interesting, really. Let's see, but that kind of stuff goes on. Men and Mare, begin to eke out existences on, and that whole era is called the Morethic era. It's during the Morethic era that the Daedra and the Aedra have the greatest influence over Mundus, before they formally withdrew their power. Some things that happened during the Morethic era is, well, essentially, men and Mare go to war, and the elves end up defeating the humans and placing them in slavery, on a wide variety of things. And the Morethic era is several hundred years long, of humans living in slavery to elves. And it is actually through the influence of Akatosh that a woman by the name of Saint Alicia is, granted, pseudo-divine powers by Akatosh, so that she can liberate humans from elven control. And Alicia is known as what is known as a dragonborn, based on the fact that Akatosh appears as a dragon and has granted power unto Alicia, therefore making her dragonborn. It's also during the Morethic era that, coincidentally, that dragons have taken control, that in some parts of Mundus, dragons have also enslaved, humans and all that. And, it's less of like the elves enslave humans because they, view them as the spawn of Lorcan, inferior, all that kind of stuff. The dragons enslave humans because they're, ooh-ah, I'm a dragon. Fuck you. Sorry. There are humans who willingly served the dragons and assisted in the enslavement of other humans, but and Akatosh did decide to give his power to some of those people under the dragons, some of those people working for the dragons. The first ever human that Akatosh gave the power to slay dragons, essentially, was, his name was, give me a second. I believe it was, gosh, it was, I think it starts with an M. It's, Mirak. Yeah, Mirak. Mirak was the first ever human that, Akatosh gave the power to slay dragons. Mirak was also a dragonborn, but Mirak did, work for the dragons. He decided to. Eventually, Mirak was captured by the Daedric prince Hermaeus Mora, who took him to his realm of oblivion and essentially gave him unlimited life in exchange for his eternal servitude. So, but after that, Akatosh chose to bestow that blessing to slay dragons to others, and eventually gave the power to a man named Jurgen Windcaller, who, through the blessings of Kianrath, was able to, you know, break humans out of the control of the dragons, go to war with them, and they were eventually successful, and dragons were exterminated. You know, Jurgen Windcaller then, realized that he had misused the powers granted to him by Kinnereth, and instead decided to dedicate himself to the worship of Kinnereth using the powers she had given him, which formed the Greybeards, who followed the teachings of Jurgen Windcaller. It's a whole thing. But no. So, through the help of Saint Alicia, humans break free of the control of the elves. Elves still believe themselves racially superior to humans. It's a whole thing. But no. So humans are now free. So, all that happens during the Morrowind era. And it's also during this Morrowind era that humans and Mare, make official contact. Because at the point at which they first interacted, they were the El-No-Fae and the Wanderers. But it's during the Morrowind era that the El-No-Fae and the Mare and the Man, meet up again. So there are several races of Man and Mare that have proliferated through the Morrowind era. Some of them have died out, but the ones that are left, it's of the Mare, there were the Altmare. Well, no. First, there were the Aldmare. The Aldmare were the closest descendants of the El-No-Fae, and still believed themselves very close to the divines. They were masters of magic, which again, I established was a divine gift upon them. And the Aldmare were the original elves. The original humans, it's unclear, but it might have been the Atmorans. Excuse me. Because the Atmorans are the earliest ever humans on record. So it is entirely possible that they were the first. Humans, diversified as they do. There were the Red Guards of Hammerfell. There were the, Nords of Skyrim. There were the Imperials of Cyrodiil. And, as Men and Mare spread out, they established a continent known as Tamriel. That's a whole different thing, During the human enslavement by the elves, a race known as the Bretons came about, as a result of interbreeding between humans and their elven masters. And the Bretons, which are considered human, settled in High Rock, Okay. But no, the Aldmare. Remember, this is still during the Morrowind era. The Aedra are still very influential in the world, as well as the Daedra. So the first race to split off of the Aldmare are known as the Dwemer, right? The Dwemer, or they're also known as the Dwarves, or the Deep Elves, or the Deep Folk. Whereas the Aldmare were, ravenously loyal to the Aedra. They worshipped them, they denounced the Daedra, they denounced Lorcan, and they were very about worship and religion. The Dwemer were more about, machinery and logic and, the use of magic for machines. The Dwemer believed that the Aldmare were far too reliant on the Aedra, and so they split off and began to, go across Tamriel. Like some of the oldest structures in Tamriel were built by the Dwemer. The oldest one is actually the Adamantine Tower, which was built by the Divines, and it was where Lorcan was judged. But that's not important. It's in High Rock, yeah. But no, the Dwemer spread out. They, begin to live underground, making machinery, making, incredible contraptions far beyond the rest of the world. And, they do that for a while. So that's what the Dwemer do. The second group of elves to split off are known as the Bosmer, or the Wood Elves. They decided to live a life of monastic tradition, druidcraft, all that kind of stuff. Essentially, they split off from the rest of the Aldmere, who still followed the sometimes warring, Aedra, and decided to live in Valenwood, essentially an enormous forest where, they established their own society. Well, that's pretty cool. Let's see. No, so now there are the Aldmere, right? The Aldmere are devout followers of all of the Aedra. Akatosh is, of course, their chief divine, who they call Oriel, because, their elves is a different language. They are also devout followers of a Aedra known as Trinimac. Trinimac is, he personifies strength and conquest and, order, essentially. But eventually there is an Aldmere known as Saint Veloth. Now, Saint Veloth's whole deal is that in his dreams he is visited by three of the Daedra, those being Azura, Boethia, and Mephala. Azura is the embodiment of fate and change. Boethia is the embodiment of plot and deception, and Mephala is the embodiment of sin and lies. But essentially, they come to Veloth and they tell him to lead his people away from the Aedra, to bring them to the eastern part of Tamriel, where they will establish a kingdom that will live forever and rival anything the Aedra ever created. So Veloth, sees this in his dreams, and begins preaching the word of Azura, Mephala, and Boethia. And he begins to lead a group of, people. Let's see. The Aldmere, they're all, a bit indignant about it. They're saying, how could you betray the divines? Why are you rejecting their teachings? Why would you do this? And they begin to refer to Veloth and his followers as the Chimere, which means the changed people, or the changed elves. So Veloth leads his people across the world, and so eventually Trinimac is sent to deal with Veloth and his followers. So Trinimac and, his army of Aldmere come in, they confront Veloth, but Boethia appears before them and challenges Trinimac. Boethia, is defeated by Trinimac in battle, but it is Mephala who uses the opportunity to kill Trinimac. Boethia then consumes Trinimac, possesses Trinimac's body, and leads, Boethia consumes Trinimac's body, gives a whole speech about the weakness and worthlessness of the Aedra in comparison to the power of the Daedra. Boethia then excretes what is left of Trinimac, and Trinimac has now become Malakath, who is the embodiment of curses and the spurned as a result of what Boethia had done to him. Trinimac's followers, embrace Malakath, embrace, what was once Trinimac and is now Malakath, and are too corrupted by the powers that had destroyed Trinimac, and they become known as the Orsimer, or the, I don't remember what Orsa stands for, but essentially they are the orcs. You know, Malakath, and now Malakath has become a Daedra. Right. So then, Azura, Mephala, and Boethia guide the Chimer to, it's called Morrowind. They settle Morrowind. And if you remember, Vardenfell is part of Morrowind. So essentially they settle around where the heart of Lorkhan had fallen. Though they don't know that. There they meet some of the Dwemer, and they forge an alliance with them. The Dwemer had also formed alliances with the Red Guards of Hammerfell, all that kind of stuff. But essentially, all that is left of the original Aldmere are just, some of them. And eventually, over the centuries, they become known as the Altmere, or the High Elves, or the Great Elves, or the Old Elves. They believe themselves very deeply tied to the Aedra still, and, continue following their teachings, spurning the Chimera, who are now Daedra worshippers. So that's what the Altmere do. So during the First Era, I believe, no, hold on. Alright, the First Era, nothing much happens. It's the Second Era where things start to happen, humans and elves, continue to be different, but humans are now a free people and free to establish their own societies. All that kind of stuff. But Tamriel is still a very war-torn continent. There's debates about, who should rule it, who is the authority on everything, and it's mostly scattered feudal systems of humans and elves everywhere. And it's debated on whether, he was a Breton or an Atmoran or an Imperial, but essentially he was a human known as Tiber Septim, or Talos, essentially rises up and creates an army and begins sweeping across Tamriel. How Tiber Septim achieves all this is he essentially comes across a Dwemer. Well, either the Dwemer created it for him, or they had created it and he seizes control of it. But he essentially, gains control over an enormous Dwemer machine called the Numidium. Essentially a robot, just a giant automaton that can be piloted and used. And at the time, it was the ultimate piece of warlike machinery. And Talos, Tiber Septim used it to conquer all of Tamriel. The way he controlled the Numidium was through a combination of two souls. One of the Underking, who, channeled, dark powers, and who Tiber Septim went out to destroy. And Tiber Septim's first mate, Wulfarth, his general. During Tiber Septim's and Wulfarth's battle with the Underking, Wulfarth and the Underking's souls merged together in their death and became the Mantella, which Tiber Septim then used to pilot the Numidium. Essentially, Tiber Septim sweeps across Tamriel, conquers all of it, and unites it under imperial rule. Essentially, establishes the first empire of Tamriel. And after Tiber Septim's death, his soul, Wolfarth's soul, and the Underking's soul all combine together and become a divine being known as Talos. And it is through this combination of souls that Talos achieves Shin. Essentially, he escapes from the Godhead's dream and becomes godlike himself. And he becomes a divine, essentially, and he is worshipped in human pantheons for his, incredible achievement for humankind. Now, this is also contested by the elves. The elves believe that, it's impossible that such a thing could have happened, that a human could have become divine, and they denounce Talos' divinity, which is, it's objectively true that Talos became a divine being. Like, you can physically interact with him and pray to him and do all that kind of stuff. So, in no uncertain terms, Talos is divine. He achieved Chim, he escaped the Godhead, he is divine. But the elves, hold fast that he cannot be divine. He is a human, and a follower of Lorcan. He could not stand among the Aedra. It's a whole thing. Let's see. That's a whole thing. Let's see. There are other records of humans and elves who achieved Chim. They're not really important. Let's see. So back to the Chimera, right? So, they're going about their business, worshipping the Daedra, doing all the things they do, living in harmony with the Dwemer. An uneasy harmony, but it is harmony nonetheless. But, as the Dwemer investigate Morrowind, investigate Vardenfell, they plot an expedition into the Red Mountain, and they discover the heart of Lorcan in the center of Red Mountain. They're amazed by it. They, go out and they tell the Chimera, like, we have found the heart of Lorcan. This is incredible. The Chimera are initially suspicious and think this is, a disrespect of their culture, of their, ancestral heritage. Essentially, it's saying, the Dwemer have already, rejected the, Aedra, already, turned away from them, and now you mock us by telling us you have found the corpse of a progenitor being. This is parallel, which, strains relationships a bit. But the Dwemer are, still elated nonetheless. They say, this is what we've been looking for. This is an ultimate source of power that we could use. And so they employ their chief architect, whose name is Akhulakhan, to invent a set of tools that can be used to experiment on the heart. Right? So Akhulakhan creates the tools Wraithguard, Sunder, and Keenan, which will allow him to siphon divine energy from the heart without being harmed himself with the use of Wraithguard. And he begins to experiment on the heart in the hopes of achieving divinity and Chim for the dwarves, essentially so they may become fully enlightened and live forever. And the Chimera are furious. By now they've accepted that, yes, the heart of Lorcan is in Red Mountain, but when they hear about the Dwemer, experimenting on the heart, they consider it an ultimate act of sacrilege. Even though Lorcan is, a devil in their minds, he is still, a divine being, and tampering with, his heart is heresy. So they begin to, tensions ramp up, and eventually the Chimera and the Dwemer go to war. And what ensues is the battle at Red Mountain, with the Chimera pressing towards Red Mountain and the Dwemer retreating inside. Eventually, all of the Dwemer forces gather inside of Red Mountain, and Khagranach, in a last-ditch effort, uses the tools on the heart of Lorkhan. And in that moment, all of the Dwemer disappear from Nier. Where they went, what happened to them, is a heavily debated subject, but it is either theorized that they were all destroyed, or all achieved Chim, or all became defined and were transported to the Age of Flame. But whatever happened, what they had done to the heart of Lorkhan caused them all to disappear. Every single Dwemer on Nier was gone. One Dwemer did survive, but only because he was on a plane of oblivion at the time in which it happened. And, his life's work is figuring out what happened to the rest of the Dwemer. Right. But when Khagranach and all of his, people disappeared, they left behind the tools Wraithguard, Sunder, and Keenan. Right. And, so, the Chimera generals, go into Red Mountain and they find these tools. And these generals are Vivek, Almalexia, Sothasil, Indoral Nerevar, and Vorin Dagoth. Right, these are the guys. And, Indoral Nerevar is like the chief. He is the ruler of the Chimera at this point. Vivek, Almalexia, and Sothasil are his, advisor. No, they're his. Essentially, if he's king, if Indoral Nerevar was president, Vivek, Almalexia, and Sothasil are his cabinet, and Vorin Dagoth is his advisor. Right? They represent several of the great houses of Morrowind at the time. But they go in to find all of the Dwemer gone, and they gaze upon the heart of Lorkhan. Right? They find the tools, and they're like, what should we do? Right? Let's see. They consult Indoral Nerevar to see what they should do. Vorin Dagoth, advises Indoral Nerevar to destroy the tools, do away with them, because the Dwemer are gone and the tools are the only thing left. So he says they're evil, they were created for an evil purpose, and we have no idea what they're capable of doing, so we should destroy them while we have the chance. Meanwhile, Vivek, Almalexia, and Sothasil, they tell Indoral Nerevar, no, wait, maybe we should keep them in case we need them later. We don't know what they do, we should study them, we should figure out more about them, and we could possibly use them for our own purposes. And Indoral Nerevar has to think about this, because, he trusts Vorin Dagoth, but he also trusts his, Sothasil, Vivek, and Almalexia. So, he, goes out to consult with his three cabinet members privately, and leaves the tools in the hands of Vorin Dagoth and tells them, wait here, make sure nothing happens to the tools. I will consult with my cabinet and come to a decision. But Vorin, he understands that, he can see the looks in Almalexia, Sothasil's, and Vivek's faces, and he knows that they're not going to take no for an answer, and that they will, if they get a hold of the tools, take them and use them for their own purposes, and further defile the heart of Lorkhan. And so, while Indoral Nerevar and his three cabinet members are talking, Vorin Dagoth begins experimenting on the heart himself, and, successfully interfaces with it and allows the divine energy to flow into himself. essentially creates a link between himself and the heart of Lorcan, gaining incredible powers, but also the power to defend the heart from those who it misuses. It's at this point that Indoril Nerevar, Vivek, Omlesi, and so the Sill come back in, only to see what Vorin Dagoth has done to himself. And, Indoril Nerevar has no choice but to do battle with his old friend, Vorin Dagoth. They clash, they battle, and eventually Vorin Dagoth falls, and he is cast into Red Mountain, where he is presumed dead, where he dies. But Indoril Nerevar is horribly wounded by the encounter, and he recollects the tools. He gives them to Vivek, Omlexi, so the Sill, and he makes them promise in his dying moments that they will keep the tools away and never let anything happen to anyone like what happened to Vorin Dagoth. Essentially, they will lock them away, keep them safe, and honor Vorin Dagoth's wishes to make sure that nobody can ever misuse them. And it is at that point that Indoril Nerevar dies. He succumbs to his injuries and passes away. But as both Vorin Dagoth and Indoril Nerevar are dead, Vivek, Omlesi, and so the Sill take the tools, re-enter Red Mountain, and attempt to do what Vorin Dagoth did and gain divine energy from the heart themselves. To a point, they are successful, but they do gain incredible power. They become tantamount to divine. But Azura, one of the chief deities of the Chimera, sees what Vivek, Omlesi, and so the Sill have done and becomes furious. So she descends, appears before them, and just tears into them, tells them, you have dishonored Indoril Nerevar's legacy. He gave up his life for you, and you have betrayed him. And as punishment for their actions, Azura took the entire Chimera race, and changed their eyes red like fire and their skin gray like ash, so that they would never forget that day on Red Mountain. And she called them the Dunmare, or the Dark Elves, as punishment for what they had allowed to happen. And furthermore, she prophesied that one day Indoril Nerevar would be reborn, and would come to destroy Omlexi, so the Sill, and Vivek, restore peace to Morrowind, and, destroy the heart of Lorcan. Therefore, severing the divine connection that Vivek, so the Sill, and Omlexia had. Then she disappears. So, Vivek, Omlexi, and so the Sill, who now call themselves the Tribunal, emerge from Red Mountain with the tools and proclaim themselves the new deities of the now Dunmare people. They say that the Daedra have been controlling us, but we can set you free. We can bring about a new age of prosperity and life. And, for a long time they do. Throughout the first era and much of the second era, they do all that they do. They create enormous, beautiful cities. They launch Morrowind to a period of prosperity and, amazing life and culture that they had never seen before. But the problem arises in that the Tribunal is not truly divine. Every so often they must return to the heart of Lorcan and use Khagranok's tools to re-siphon energy and renew their divinity. And this becomes a problem because the Daedra, you know, now, like, well, we'll show them, begin to attack, the tribunal. And, whereas Sothasil and Almalexia are much more concerned with the arts and logic and recreating the inventions of the Dwemer, it is left up to Vivek to defend Morrowind from the Daedra. You know, he's relentlessly attacked over and over, and is able to hold them back, but once again, he must continue, like, refueling his divine power, otherwise, Morrowind will surely fall to the Daedra. And it is during the Second Era that, within the Red Mountain, Vorin Dagoth reawakens. Thanks to his connection to the Heart of Lorkhan, when Endoral Nerevar slew him, he did die, but the Heart of Lorkhan brought him back to life. So long as the Heart of Lorkhan stands, Vorin Dagoth is unkillable. And unlike the Tribunal, who only achieved a false measure of godhood from the heart, Vorin Dagoth became truly divine. He did not achieve Chim. He did not achieve Chim. But he did realize the existence of the Godhead. And his goal from that point was to achieve Chim, free himself from, the universe inside of the Godhead stream, and using that power, he would, he would free, Morrowind from the control of the Tribunal and establish a paradise, And so what Vorin Dagoth, who now calls himself Dagoth chose to do was create essentially a blight and spread it across Morrowind. And what the blight would do was to transform the Dunmerry people into what he called sleepers or dreamers. It would warp their bodies, warp their minds, and bring them into a deep sleep, at which point they would all begin having one collective dream and be connected to Dagoth through his mind. And Dagoth hoped that by doing this, he would be able to create such a massive hive mind, that he would achieve true enlightenment and be able to achieve Chim and become all-powerful. And in order to make sure that Vivek, Almalexia, and Sothasil cannot interfere, he begins sending these warped creatures out to attack, Vivek's cities. Vivek does manage to hold them back for a time, but this leaves him open to attacks from the Daedra, who significantly weaken him. And as Dagoth now resides in Red Mountain, he is protecting the Heart of Lorkhan from the Tribunal so they can no longer recharge their power. And so their power is failing, Dagoth-Ur's army is rising, he's getting closer to achieving true enlightenment, and, things are not looking so good. And around this time is when the Third Era starts. And the Third Era, during that time, it is when Azura's prophecy begins to come true. People start looking towards the prophecy Azura delivered and saying, we need somebody to go and destroy Dagoth-Ur. We need somebody to, attack the Heart of Lorkhan and save all of us. And so they began looking for Nerevar reborn. They send out scout parties, officially request assistance, all that kind of stuff, and attempt to find Nerevar reborn, which they begin to call the Nerevarine, or the Nerevarine. the Nerevarine. They do find several people who they believe to be the Nerevarine, but all of them eventually fall or are defeated by Dagoth Ur. And they are selectively blessed by Azura with, based on whether or not they are the Nerevarine. A lot of the prophecy does not come directly from Azura and is inferred by the Dunmerry people, but the point is, they are now actively looking for a Nerevarine in order to destroy Dagoth Ur and save Morrowind. And eventually, that's where the third game, Morrowind, starts, and you play as the Nerevarine. It's debated on whether or not the player character is actually the Nerevarine, but, the general consensus is that yes, they are the Nerevarine. They are Nerevar reborn, champion of Azura. They travel across Morrowind. The Tribunal obviously tries to stop them, because part of Azura's property is that the Tribunal will be destroyed. But, the Nerevarine manages to make it through because of their weakened power. He collects Kagranok's tools, he rebuilds, Wraithguard, he collects Sunder and Keening. He's able to fight off the disease that Dagoth Ur tries to use to turn him into a sleeper. He destroys what is left of House Dagoth, and eventually, with the blessings of Azura, he makes his way to Red Mountain, descends in and confronts Dagoth Ur. And Dagoth Ur is, happy to see, Nerevar reborn, calls him an old friend, and offers him, salvation, and he shows him his master plan. Dagoth Ur has been rebuilding the Numidia, right, and he plans to use it once he seats himself within it and use it to spread his blight across the entirety of Tamriel. He will finally be able to achieve Chim and reach a level of true enlightenment and divinity. Right. And he is going to use the Heart of Lorkhan as a power source for his new Numidia, which he calls Akhulakhan. Right. So, but the Nerevarine, under, the orders of Azura, attacks Dagoth Ur, does battle with him, but is unable to really do anything to him, because in Dagoth Ur's own words, he's a god, and how can you kill a god? What a grand and intoxicating innocence. They skirt around Akhulakhan, and eventually the Nerevarine is able to reach the Heart of Lorkhan inside Akhulakhan, and using Kagranok's tools, disrupts it and destroys it, causing Akhulakhan to fall to pieces and Dagoth Ur's divinity to be stripped away, as well as the divinity of the Tribunal. And, the Tribunal, Dagoth Ur, and Akhulakhan all, Dagoth Ur and Akhulakhan fall into Red Mountain destroyed, and the Tribunal lose their divinity and fall. Azura appears before you, the Nerevarine, commemorates you on fulfilling the prophecy, and, that's about where the game ends. But, in future games, it is revealed that some lingering fragment of, the Tribunal's power does remain, but they are incredibly minor influences. So essentially, the Tribunal is gone, Dagoth Ur is gone, and, the blight that Dagoth Ur was spreading across Tamriel is, reversed and cured. And so, yeah, that is the plot of Morrowind.